The ridge was quiet. The drills were running. The chart in her lap showed a wind shift no one else marked. Command dismissed the sensor ping. The tower said it was a glitch. Shooters were out of position. But Reese stayed on the scope. She saw the breach forming. She knew the angle. She knew the wind. No one cleared her to fire. No one even asked what she saw. She took the shot anyway. That's how the threat ended, with one bullet, through silence, from the woman no one included. Because one observer, and her pencil, tracked what the system refused to see. The air hung cold above the gravel pads at first light, the kind of desert chill that slipped under collar seams and into wrists and ankles without force. A line of signal towers blinked faint amber on the horizon, their lights dim against a slow-rising sun. Rows of steel cargo sheds sat quiet behind the concrete berms, and the faint echo of rotor blades far off and irregular threaded through the wind like a rhythm only the airbase itself could hear. Reese arrived without fanfare, as she always did. Her boots moved quietly over the pitted dirt, her steps even and unhurried. She wore standard base camo, the pattern sun-faded along the knees and elbows. Her vest was marked with one black-inked word stitched across the back panel: Observer. No rank stripe, no division patch, just the assignment that had been handed to her and never updated. She crossed to the edge of Pad 2, where a group of sniper trainees were already setting up. Metal crates clanked open as scopes were lifted, checked, and mounted. Someone called out a wind check from the east quarter. Another responded with a correction. Too wide, too fast. Reese said nothing. They weren't talking to her. One of them, a tall man with a grin that came too easily, nodded toward her without really looking. "Hey, cloud counter's here," he said to his friend as he nudged a spare rangefinder into its slot. "Maybe she'll track butterflies for us too." The other man laughed. Not loud, but enough. Reese didn't acknowledge them. She stepped to the outer marker, unpacked her range pad, and placed it flat across a weathered folding board. Her hands moved with muscle memory, smooth. No wasted movement. She unrolled a laminated drift chart from her side pouch. Its surface, creased and soft, at the edges from hundreds of uses. A strip of cloth had been tied to one corner to keep it from folding against itself in high wind. She let it settle in the sand and reached for her pencil. It was wrapped in tape near the center, not because it was broken, but because she liked the grip that way. The red grease had worn to a flat point, its tip pressed often but never sharpened to a blade. She used it like a surgeon would use a scalpel, deliberate, measured. Her eyes moved to the first wind flag 300 meters out, fluttering against the slope of the western rise. She watched the tip of the flag, not its body. The difference mattered. Then she shifted her gaze to the thermal shimmer lifting over the sand, gauging the current rise rate against horizon drag. She recorded her first mark, wind bearing 2 degrees above forecast, surface roll at 1.3 meters per second. She boxed the numbers without commentary. Across the line, instructors adjusted spotting scopes. Orders were traded across clipped headset mics. Reese was not on their channel. She didn't need to be. A Comtech had offered to patch her into the main feed 3 weeks ago. She declined. There was nothing in their chatter she hadn't already heard before. She finished marking the baseline conditions for the West Ridge and moved to the lower bracket. Her fingers hovered once over the chart, calculating angle against uneven terrain. She could see where the draft was pulling under the brush line, something too subtle for the digital system to flag. She logged it manually. 3 entries, 3 corrections. No one asked for them. A supply quad trundled past behind her, kicking up a small plume of powdered dust. Reese waited for it to settle before folding her lower chart segment with one practiced motion and clipping it to her board. The wind tugged once at the hem of her jacket and then passed. One of the instructors across the range raised his voice, not quite shouting but audible over the radio static. "We're live in 2. Last call for spotter data." A few notes rang out in response, quick calls of wind rate and field pressure. None of them aligned. Reese stayed silent. Her data was already written. boxed, and exact. The first shot cracked across the pad. Not clean. She tracked the drift a full half-second before the echo, noted the drop, and penciled in a correction that wouldn't be read. A pair of trainees to her right muttered something about scope shake. Another adjusted his jacket collar like it was the jacket's fault. Reese kept writing. As the drills continued, she shifted her focus between flag drift and thermals, annotating wind loops and noting break patterns near the southern ridge wall. No one glanced her way. No one crossed the line to ask what she was seeing. They never did. Still, she stayed until her field log held 100.0 minutes of data. That was her rhythm personal, unspoken, consistent. At the end of that mark, she folded her drift chart cleanly, aligned the pencil along its spine, and slipped both into her side pouch. As she turned toward the equipment rack, the bass loudspeaker cracked overhead with a dry buzz. The voice was faint under the static. "Sandstorm watch active, 30% chance. Stand by." A few of the instructors looked up. One of them cursed under his breath. The taller sniper muttered something about getting buried gear out early. Reese stood still, listening to the wind. She looked once toward the ridgeline. The sunlight hadn't broken through fully yet, but she could see the upper contour starting to glow soft gold catching against rock edge. Then she looked down at her vest, at the name they had stitched in without asking her preference. Observer. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete either. Her fingers brushed the edge of the grease pencil through the pouch. She didn't take it out again. There was nothing left to mark for now. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder and turned back toward the outpost. The morning drills would continue. So would the silence. She expected nothing else. By midday, the heat had changed. It didn't rise in waves now. It shimmered, tight and flat over the ridgeline like a pane of glass. The wind flags still moved, but they drooped slightly at the tips, registering only surface gusts that didn't match the pressure Reese felt in her jaw and behind her ears. The crosswind had shifted sometime after 1000 hours, just enough to affect low-angle drag, but not enough for the sensor log to blink yellow. Reese noted it anyway. She logged the shift manually, angled her scope lower, and adjusted the pressure lines on her chart. The recon post sat just northeast of the tower complex, tucked behind a stack of signal cases and one portable shade rig that didn't do much except block her view of the supply quad trails. From this angle, the entire valley spread out before her in a wide arc scrub clusters. Flattened grass rose, and a dry creek channel that cut diagonally across the lower third. It was known for swirl drift and shadow pooling. That was part of why she'd been assigned here. Not to watch targets, to watch the wind. Her tools were minimal. A laminated field map folded in thirds, a range scope adjusted for glare, and the same tape-wrapped grease pencil she had used that morning. The ridge cast no real shadow now. The sun was too high, and the heat too direct. Still, she could feel a wrongness forming in the distance. Not something she could name at first. Just a shape in the landscape that didn't repeat. She checked the exercise sheet again, just to be sure. The sniper qualification cycle was in Phase 3, moving targets across the southeast field zone. None of the scheduled silhouettes were placed beyond marker 5. What she was watching was near marker 8, and moving. Reese leaned into the scope, re-centered, and counted. 4 shapes, all low to the ground. The pacing was too tight for trainees, too methodical. No separation gaps, no jitter from radio comms. Just steady forward motion, quartered across terrain in a line that didn't match any pre-briefed scenario. The wind at this range was deceptive. It flattened sound. She could see the grass lean backward in slow waves but heard nothing. No crunch, no scrape, no wind shear against packs or boots. Just movement, consistent, unbroken. She double-checked her compass readout, then drew a small arc on her paper map, a contour that tracked their motion against the slope angle. Her pencil made a faint grit sound against the page. She boxed the mark, adjusted for estimated drift, and clicked her radio once. Observer Post 4 reporting unscheduled movement. northwest quadrant of Zone 7, bearing 182. Confirm no friendly units in that pathing. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for background noise to rise. Then the channel crackled with a voice she knew. Post 4. This is Tower. Wind distortion may be generating false signatures. No assets operating in that band. Recommend visual reset. Over. Reese didn't blink. She adjusted her scope by 1 degree and watched the line move again. This time she was sure there were 4 figures crouched, smooth, advancing just beyond the hollow in the far scrub. She tapped the map again and redrew the arc. Thicker this time. Her pencil left a smudge near the bottom edge. She keyed the mic again, calm and even. Tower. Visual confirms pattern movement inconsistent with scheduled drills. Recommend recheck of Zone 8 boundaries. Thermal pattern does not match mirage drift. Over. This time the voice came back sharper. Lieutenant Kendra Malloy, clipped and confident. Observer. We show full green on external teams. Zone 7 is cleared for exercise. No friendly units unaccounted. You may be picking up terrain echo. Maintain your post. Tower out. No follow-up, no queries, just done. Across the private channel, someone else muttered with a grin in their voice. Mirage fever. Gets 'em every year when the rock starts breathing. The comment wasn't directed at her. It didn't need to be. Reese sat back slightly, not enough to break line of sight, and looked at the figures again. They hadn't stopped. If anything, they had increased pace, moving now in slight diagonals. She could see the lead shape shift behind a low mound, then reappear 2 meters forward, too clean for random drift. She opened her map fully on the flat tray in front of her and began redrawing the boundary lines. She circled the terrain funnel she had noted earlier, the slope that carried sound downward but diffused visual contrast. Then she drew a new symbol, an irregular spiral with a bar through the middle. It wasn't part of any issued protocol. It was hers. She had used it 3 times before, on 3 other bases, when drift patterns turned from irregular to calculated. No one else knew what it meant. That was the point. The wind rolled past again, low and slow. One of the forward flags twisted just enough to confirm the crossdraft was still active. Reese reached for her pencil and drew one final mark of projected trajectory, barely visible across the map's lower edge. She pressed a little harder than she needed to. The graphite broke slightly at the tip. She looked at the scope again, then to the valley, and back to the line on her page. She did not call tower again. There was no use. Instead, she stared at the unapproved symbol she had drawn, the one shaped like a warning whispered without sound. Her fingers hovered just above the page. She didn't erase it. She didn't mark it as a note. She just left it there, watching, waiting, like her. By late afternoon, the light had shifted again. It no longer flared against the gravel or danced over the scope lens. It had gone flat, the kind of dimmed clarity that made everything look just a little too still. Reese adjusted her position slightly to stay within the shadow cast by the tower's outer rigging. The heat was no longer unbearable, but it had left behind a kind of weight in the air, thick with dust and silence. Her headset fed her a slow drip of routine updates. Tower calling wind adjustment for range 6. One trainee requesting resupply coordinates. A correction on calibration from Zone 3. None of it mattered. Not now. The valley stretched out quiet in front of her, and the motion she'd tracked all morning had returned. This time she didn't need the scope. They were moving again. Not drifting. Not pacing like a patrol. Moving with intent. Organized and tight. 5 figures now, spread into 2 staggered groups, crossing the far edge of Zone 8 just outside what the base had mapped as secure boundary. There were no scheduled friendlies in that zone. Reese had already checked 3 times. Her chart sat folded beside her boot, untouched since she'd marked it earlier. Her scope confirmed the motion without ambiguity. The pattern of approach was unmistakable. Then the base system chimed a clipped, mechanical tone through the headset. Motion alert, outer perimeter, low confidence index. Reese keyed her mic. Tower. This is post 4. Motion confirmed. 5 figures. Quadrant north by northwest. Outside exercise boundary. Bearing 203. Repeat confirmed sighting. Visual non-compliant with base pathing. Awaiting instruction. A pause, then a voice familiar. Curt. Post 4. Tower here. That sensor has a false positive history. You are advised to maintain your post. Teams are in position. All drills still active. No escalation. Another pause. Static. Then a second voice cut across the main channel. Tower. This is field command. 1 shooter's out. Maddox is pinned in the low range behind elevation shift. Trainee Ortega lost line of sight during last fire cycle. Trying to reassign sector. Reese didn't speak. She already knew. The tower had lost its flank coverage. The breach wasn't theoretical. It wasn't flagged by some long-range predictive system or picked up by drone echo. It was walking right in now through an unguarded slope that command didn't even have eyes on, except hers. She reached for the chart once more, confirming her hand-drawn arc. The wind had pulled slightly east, enough to change her earlier drift line by 2 degrees. It was still within a predictable range, but not for anyone else. Only someone who had been watching the patterns, hour by hour, could make that call without waiting for a readout. She looked down the ridge behind her. No one was coming. Not to her post. Not to the rifle someone had left leaning against the sandbag wall. It had been sitting there since the trainee jogged off after reporting a fogged scope and overheating thermal wrap. Reese hadn't moved it. It wasn't hers. But now it was the only thing that could make a difference. She stepped over to it. Slow. Careful. As if walking into something sacred. Her hands didn't shake as she lifted it. Her posture shifted not dramatically, just enough to mark the difference. She was no longer observing. She was aligning. The rifle was clean, well-oiled, heavy in a way that settled against her like it knew her shape. She checked the chamber, loaded, safety on. She flipped it off. Her finger did not rest on the trigger yet. She had done this before. Not here. Not for them. But somewhere. Long ago. Under skies that had carried a different kind of silence. She sank to one knee, adjusted the sling pressure, and lowered her cheek to the stock. Her breath was measured, in through the nose, out slowly through the mouth. 1 count, 2, eyes open, crosswind steady. She adjusted the sight by a quarter mark. It compensated for the lift loss against the sloped valley pressure. The first figure crested the rise. Too clean, too upright. Not part of the drill. Her hand moved to stabilize her base. The second figure moved next, slightly behind, staggered just right. Reese didn't wait for the third. Her breath slowed. 1 shot, no echo, no collapse. Just one form dropping out of motion. The others halted. The stillness after was deep. No sound from her headset, no return fire, no sudden alert from the tower. Just stillness. The breach had ended not with noise, not with light, but with a pause so profound it made the wind sound louder than it was. Reese lowered the rifle and exhaled. She didn't scan for acknowledgement. She didn't radio. She folded her chart, clipped her pencil into place, and stood. The rifle was left leaning again where she had found it, not dropped, just returned. Down below, the wind flag still fluttered the wrong direction, subtle, almost invisible. But Reese had seen it all along. She turned away from the scope, brushed the dirt from her knee, and looked toward the tower. They hadn't seen it. They hadn't even known to look. But it was done, and that was enough. The silence after the shot was not immediate. It arrived in layers. First, the hush in her headset, 3 full seconds of pure nothing. No static, no breath, no click of acknowledgement. Then the world around her seemed to lean back, as if the air itself was registering that something final had occurred. The wind barely moved. The flag at her post, which had been fluttering unevenly all day, now hung with its tip bent downward, weighted by stillness. Then the voices returned. Tower to all units confirm status. Range teams. Check in. Who engaged? Repeat. Who fired? Another voice cut in. This one sharper. We have unknown engagement from perimeter east. No ID on source. Confirm all shooters in hold. Can anyone verify shot origin? More chatter followed names, sector numbers, range statuses, some of it clipped, some confused. No one claimed it. No one even knew where to point. The entire system hesitated in its own echo. Reese stayed exactly where she was for one full breath, then another. She looked through the scope again, not to verify a hit, but to read the drift. It had already shifted by a fraction, almost unnoticeable unless you'd been charting it every hour. She noted it automatically, a habit long drilled into her hands. She stepped back from the wall, unstrapped the board from the support rail, and gently folded her map along the existing crease. Her red grease pencil had stayed balanced on the upper edge of the board. She picked it up, checked the tip, and placed it lengthwise across the folded chart. She slid both into her vest pocket. The casing from the single shot sat near the base of the sandbag. She didn't touch it. The rifle was still propped where she had returned it. No one had come to retrieve it yet. She stepped away from the post. Not hurried. Not slow. Just deliberate. The tower looked closer now than it had before, its comms dish still turning with mechanical regularity. She crossed the gravel in a direct path, each step lifting a faint cloud of dust that drifted behind her and vanished by the time her next footfall landed. From the upper window, a figure stood partially turned toward her, headset still looped over one ear. They didn't raise a hand. They didn't wave. But they were watching. Reese didn't change pace. The tower door opened before she reached it. A junior tech, barely 20, probably not even field cleared, held it open with one hand and stood frozen in the frame like he didn't know if he was supposed to speak or salute or vanish entirely. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a distant thunderclap they forgot to expect. She didn't speak either, just reached into her left pocket, pulled out a small rectangular data card, the kind used for internal range diagnostics, and handed it over. No label, no cover sheet, no protective sleeve. Just the card, warm from her vest, with whatever her recorder had logged in the last hour. The tech took it with both hands. Reese was already turning before he remembered to nod. She walked past the row of parked carts without pause. The outer pad had mostly cleared. A few crews still packed up equipment. One man, an instructor from the morning set, paused mid-tie down to glance in her direction. She didn't return the look. There was no reason to. At the edge of the west pad, where the signal tower cast the longest afternoon shadow, she stopped. Not because she was unsure, only because it was part of her process. She reached for her chart again, opened it one last time, and looked at the symbol she had drawn hours ago. The spiral with the line through it. It hadn't changed. It wouldn't. She folded the page once more and slid it back into place, then stepped over the threshold of the command block's sidewalk and kept going. Behind her, no one had followed. No one had called out. The system hadn't caught up yet. It would, eventually. That wasn't her concern. She passed the base generator's low hum, the peeling paint on the back of the water tower, the old weather vane that no longer turned but still clung to the steel pole like it remembered how. All of it exactly as it had been this morning. Nothing looked different. Nothing sounded different. But everything had shifted. The sun was slanting lower now, casting long angles across the gravel, turning dust into quiet gold. Her boots moved through it as if through memory, every step light, but none of them forgettable. She didn't head toward the mess tent, didn't check back in at logistics. She just walked the outer line past the final barrier checkpoint, past the stacked pallets no one had inventoried since last cycle, past the rusted metal gate with the bent latch that never quite locked. As she reached the final bend before the barracks, she paused once, hand resting lightly on her hip, fingers brushing the folded chart in her vest pocket. The wind picked up again just a little, enough to stir the bottom edge of her jacket and lift the faint scent of iron and stone from the ridge beyond. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had done what they couldn't see coming. And now it was quiet, The sun had dropped low enough to scrape long shadows across the gravel when Reese stepped back toward the tower. Light bled gold through the base perimeter, tinting the cargo crates and brushed steel of the sensor racks. Cleanup was already underway. Trainees moved in pairs, stowing cables and wiping down rangefinders with the kind of focused silence that came after something unexpected. No one spoke above a murmur. Even the usual laughter had flattened into something else. Across the pad, techs moved slower than usual, not sluggish, just more careful. A portable diagnostics unit let out a series of soft beeps before going quiet again. One of the instructors leaned against the side rail of a utility cart, his clipboard untouched in his hands. He was staring toward the ridge where Reese had stood. He didn't write anything down. Inside the tower, the floor hummed under fluorescent bulbs that had been on too long. The monitors near the central feed bay flickered slightly replay scans running frame by frame. 3 figures stood around the screens, none speaking. One of them gestured toward a timestamp, slow and precise. The others leaned in but didn't confirm anything. Reese approached the outer post calmly. The spot she had occupied earlier was still undisturbed. A slight print in the gravel marked where her left boot had rested. The air was cooler now, the heat from earlier having bled upward into the darkening sky. She unclipped her wind chart from the back rail, slid her pencil from the upper slot, and tucked both into her vest with practiced ease. Her headset followed unlatched cleanly and powered down before she reached the tower steps. At the door, she paused. A figure stood in front of it, junior tech, same one from earlier. He hesitated when he saw her. For a moment, it looked like he might step in front of her. Then he didn't. He backed up half a pace and pulled the door open instead, eyes flicking once toward her chart, then away. She nodded, no words. Inside, the air was colder. Fans whirred behind the panels, pulling heat from the relay units. Monitors lined the far wall, half of them displaying sector overlays. Her boots made a muted thud on the reinforced floor. 2 officers were speaking in low tones by the central console. But their conversation stopped when she entered. They didn't turn. They didn't need to. She walked to the nearest clear counter, reached into her vest, and pulled out her folded wind chart. She smoothed the top edge once, flattening a small upward curl with 2 fingers, and placed it gently on the corner of the console. Next to it, she set a sealed data card. It was unlabeled, but it glinted slightly in the overhead light. No one reached for it. Not yet. One of the monitors began replaying a feed thermal overlay, time-stamped 5 minutes after her shot. The heat signature vanished partway through. The playback paused, blinked, and began again. Behind her, someone shifted. A clipboard tapped lightly against a console rim. Another figure adjusted their headset, movement too deliberate to be casual. Reese didn't speak. She didn't wait. She turned and walked toward the exit, the same even pace she'd used across the gravel. Her boots whispered against the metal flooring. No one followed. No one blocked the path. The silence moved with her, filling in every step. Outside, the air had cooled further. The light was now deep amber, casting long pillars across the tower face. In the distance, a power unit clicked twice as it reset its cycle. Overhead, a plane traced a slow arc through the sky, silent at this altitude. She passed a cluster of crew near the barracks rail, 2 of them glancing her way mid-conversation. Their words faltered, but no one called out. No one turned to follow. She kept her pace. At the far edge of the logistics pad, an instructor from the earlier session stood holding a scope case. His eyes tracked her movement across the compound. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. But his grip shifted slightly on the handle, like he remembered something he hadn't said out loud. Reese moved past him without changing stride. Near the supply rig, a long bench held a stack of unused wind charts. Most were blank, waiting for assignment. One chart had already been logged for discard, its corners torn. Central grid water-streaked. Reese reached over, lifted it carefully, and placed her chart on top. She didn't stack it under the others. She didn't sign it in. It rested differently than the rest creased. Yes, but marked clean. Her lines were narrow and even. The symbol she had drawn near the lower fold was still visible, a single spiral, crossed. Nothing dramatic, just fact. She turned once more toward the perimeter, where the last of the sunlight was beginning to fall away behind the ridge. No voices called for her to stay. No questions broke the moment. And that was the shape of it. They didn't thank her. She didn't need them to. What had happened would settle quietly, like dust in heat after a shot that no one saw coming, like silence under a name they still weren't ready to say. But the shape of the truth had landed, and now it waited. By the time the armory lights switched to night cycle, the airbase had settled into its quiet rhythm. Outside, the wind moved low across the gravel, shifting dust in small curls between the storage racks and the base of the signal towers. Overhead, the security lights hummed in a slow pulse, one every 8 seconds. The last patrol passed by without conversation, boots marking time more from habit than vigilance. Inside the operations building, the main hallway glowed pale blue under overhead fluorescence. The long wall-mounted roster screen near the administrative checkpoint flickered once as the system prepared its hourly update. The board updated in a fixed cycle every hour on the hour, pulling data from activity logs, sensor archives, and personnel access records. No one watched it most nights. But tonight, one officer remained in the corridor. He stood with a tablet tucked under one arm, waiting for the sync cycle to finish before he returned to the flight deck review. The screen clicked softly as the system refreshed. Names scrolled past logistics, command, trainee squads, auxiliary designations. The fonts were simple, no highlights, just motion. Then one line shifted. Near the bottom of the list, below the standard observation section, a line changed its tail entry. Reese Observer became Reese Observer. Authorized fire clearance verified. There was no sound attached, no blinking icon. The update didn't overwrite the name or promote the rank. It didn't draw attention. It simply altered the status, quietly locking in the verification code from the tower's internal report. The officer paused, staring at it for a moment. Then he glanced to his left. Pinned just below the screen, taped to the lower trim, was a folded sheet of field-grade laminate. It was a wind chart creased, watermarked in one corner, marked in red grease pencil. The lines were narrow and consistent, ending in a subtle arc near the bottom edge. In the lower right quadrant was a small spiral, crossed once. There was no name printed, no title, just the data. The officer didn't touch it. He didn't need to. In the armory prep room, 2 instructors opened the last of the ammo tins for morning drills. They moved efficiently, unpacking sensors and verifying scope calibrations. One of them paused when he lifted the lid of a sealed case. Inside, tucked against the foam lining beside the round logs, was a fresh copy of the same wind chart. It had been printed with high-resolution pass-through one of the internal printers from the central tower. The lines were identical. Even the red pencil marks had been reproduced in faint overlays, like the copier had registered pressure. There were more. Each case had one. The instructors didn't ask where they came from. They didn't send for clarification. The chart stayed in place. In the next room over, someone had written a new range assumption into the default modeling software. It adjusted drift values for the northeast perimeter slope by 1.7 degrees. A small override code had been added to the record, not from a training module or a test pattern. The entry had been flagged only once, and that flag had already been cleared. No one signed off on it. The system didn't ask for permission to correct itself. Outside, the wind moved again, brushing gently against the outer chain link and tugging faintly at the canvas flap of a storage unit. Lights from the tower cycled once more. A late shift vehicle eased past the south checkpoint, tires humming softly across hardened dust. Reese walked along the outer wall just before midnight. No gear in her hands, no bag across her shoulder. Her jacket was zipped against the cooling wind, but her sleeves hung loose at the cuffs, fabric rippling slightly as she walked. The base around her was still. She passed the west fence line, where the power boxes hummed under motion-triggered lights. At the far edge of the lot, a stack of metal panels leaned against a shipping case, marked for transfer, but never claimed. She paused near the final checkpoint before the living quarters. One guard looked up briefly, then nodded. Not formal, not forced. Just a moment of recognition held between silence. Reese kept walking. She traced the path past the comms tower, past the chalkboard where briefing times were sometimes written out before updates, past the training yard where nothing now moved. The only thing left was sky and gravel and the faint impression of a shot that had never been logged, but would never be erased. Her boots left no mark in the wind. But behind her, the system had changed. Not because she asked, because it had to. Reese was never invited to lead, never asked to speak first, never handed credit. Yet when the moment came, she was the one who saw clearly. She acted without permission, without applause, and without hesitation. Her strength was not in being seen, but in seeing everything then choosing to do what was right anyway. That kind of courage does not announce itself. It does not chase medals or wait for approval. It changes the world quietly, from the edges, until even the system must adjust to the truth it once ignored. If her story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect on the power of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories that honor quiet strength, follow along. There are more to tell.